Hello, my name is Dr. Robert. For over 50 years, I've walked the long, sacred path of medicine, holding frail hands, listening to final breaths, and bearing witness to the quiet truths that no textbook could ever truly prepare me for. The lessons I've learned didn't come from classrooms or conferences, but from the bedside. From those final moments when all that truly matters reveals itself. And perhaps the greatest truth of all is this: death is not a tragedy if we know how to prepare for it. There is so much fear wrapped around the end of life, fear of pain, fear of the unknown, fear of leaving things unfinished. But I've come to see that when death is met with care, dignity, and understanding, it can be a profoundly peaceful experience, not just for the person who is dying, but also for the loved ones who are walking that path beside them. Today, I want to talk to you about one specific kind of passing, one that, in my experience, is among the most peaceful ways a human being can leave this world. It may sound surprising, even difficult to believe, but I invite you to listen with an open heart, because what I'm about to share is something I've seen many times, and each time it has reminded me that the closing chapter of life can be gentle, quiet, and filled with grace. This is the story of a kind of passing that I've come to know intimately, the kind that unfolds in those who have lived for many years with end-stage kidney disease. I know that for many, the words kidney failure immediately bring to mind suffering, exhaustion, and relentless medical procedures. And truthfully, they're not wrong. Living with this condition is not easy. It demands so much from the body, from the spirit, and from the day-to-day rhythm of life. 3 times a week, every week, patients must make the journey to a dialysis center. They sit quietly, often for 3 or 4 hours at a time, while a machine does what their kidneys no longer can. That ritual of needles, of machines humming softly, of time slipping away in waiting rooms, becomes a way of life. And over the years, that life can become heavy. Exhaustion settles into the bone. For many, the weariness isn't just physical. It's emotional, existential. It's the weight of years spent surviving, not necessarily living. Then, one day, the choice presents itself, not as an act of despair, but as a gentle truth that begins to whisper, "It's time." And when that moment comes, when a patient says, "I'm done, I can't keep doing this," something remarkable happens. Death does not arrive as a violent thief in the night. It doesn't come crashing through the door or with the chaos we so often associate with dying. Instead, it slips into the room like twilight. It is quiet, it is soft, it is slow, and it looks very much like sleep. That's what makes this journey so different. Most patients, once they stop dialysis, do not experience dramatic symptoms or overwhelming pain. What I often see is a gentle fading, more sleeping, less eating, a gradual slowing down of the entire system, and while that decline can happen fairly quickly, often within 7 to 10 days, it is not rushed, nor is it violent. It is in many ways what people hope for when they say, "I just want to go in my sleep." That, I believe, is one of the greatest gifts we can offer, the knowledge that such a passing is possible. And in the next part of this conversation, I'd like to walk you through exactly what those final days look like, what changes to expect, what signs are completely normal, and how both the patient and their loved ones can find peace in those closing hours. Because when we understand what dying truly looks like, we no longer fear it as much, and instead we begin to honor it for what it really is: a return, a release, and a quiet kind of grace. When a person chooses to stop dialysis, the body begins a quiet process of letting go. It's not dramatic. It doesn't begin with alarms or panic. In fact, if you weren't looking for it, you might miss how softly it all begins. At first, the most noticeable change is fatigue. The patient sleeps more, conversations grow shorter, meals smaller. The body, no longer filtered of its waste, begins to slow every function. Not as an act of suffering, but as a preparation. The kidneys, those silent workers, once the engines of balance, have now stepped aside, and in their absence the body turns inward. It conserves, it rests. During these days you may notice some confusion, especially when the person is awake. This isn't something to fear, it's the result of toxins gently building in the bloodstream. It might feel unsettling to watch, especially for loved ones, but from within the patient is not distressed. In fact, most are not even aware of the shift. What you're witnessing is not struggle, but surrender, a loosening of the tether between body and spirit. There may be moments of clarity, sometimes surprising, sometimes poignant, and then again more sleep. It's common for patients to stop eating and drinking. This too is natural. The body knows what it needs, and more importantly, what it no longer needs. Hunger and thirst begin to fade, not because of neglect or weakness, but because the body is returning to stillness. We often think of food and water as essential, and in life they are, but in dying they become less so. The body, in its wisdom, has begun to complete its work. In some cases, there may be itching or restlessness, usually manageable with hospice care and medication, but pain, true pain, is rare in this process. Shortness of breath is also uncommon, unless other conditions are involved. More often than not, what we see is a kind of withdrawal, like the tide slowly moving back into the ocean. It is gentle, it is steady. What can feel surprising to families is the speed. From the moment dialysis ends, the body typically begins to shut down over the course of 7 to 10 days. It can feel sudden, especially if the patient was alert, talking, and seemingly well just days before. That is perhaps the hardest part for loved ones, the swiftness with which a life begins to close. But for the person dying, it is not fast. It is simply natural. Time folds in on itself. The days drift one into the next. Sleep deepens. The world grows quieter. And then, at some point, often in the early hours of the morning, with no announcement or struggle, the breath stops. The room remains still, and a presence slips away. In that moment, if you are there, what you may feel is not devastation, but awe. A sacredness, a kind of reverence that fills the space where once there was fear. Because what you've just witnessed is not the end. It is the release. It is the body's final offering of peace. I don't say this to comfort you with sweet words or to offer false reassurance. I say it because I've seen it, not once or twice, but many times. I've sat quietly beside the beds of men and women who made the choice to stop dialysis, and I've watched how, when hospice care is involved and symptoms are managed with skill and tenderness, the dying process becomes something profoundly peaceful. It's not filled with panic, it's not filled with gasping or suffering, it's not what television dramas might have led you to believe. What I see time and again is a kind of stillness. The breathing slows, the muscles relax, the mind begins to quiet. There is no struggle for air, no violent convulsions, no cries of pain. The patient doesn't fight to hold on, not because they've given up, but because the body itself is gently letting go. The only symptom I often witness, if any, is a bit of confusion. The soft mental fog caused by the natural buildup of toxins in the blood, now that the kidneys are no longer clearing them. But even that is not distressing in the way people fear. It's more like a dreamlike state, a drifting between worlds. And in most cases, after a few confused words or a long silence, they simply close their eyes again and sleep. There's something incredibly sacred about witnessing that kind of death, one that unfolds without resistance, without noise, without fear. And it reminds me, every single time, that when we care for the dying with love, clarity, and presence, we are not just watching an ending, we are honoring a passage. One that can be as gentle as breath, as quiet as prayer. One of the most quietly powerful things I've witnessed in these final days is the presence of family. Not in grand gestures or dramatic farewells, but in the simple act of being there. You don't need to have the right words. In fact, sometimes there are no words. The truth is, the dying don't need us to fill the room with conversation, or try to keep them tethered to this world with stories and plans. What they need, what they feel, is our stillness, our touch, and our willingness to sit in that sacred silence with them. I've seen adult children reading aloud softly from books their mother once loved. I've seen spouses holding hands in a way they hadn't done in years, not out of duty but out of something deeper, a shared knowing that no more words were needed. And I've seen grandchildren crawl up beside a grandparent and simply rest their head on their chest, listening to the slow rhythm of a life that's nearing its final note. These moments don't look like anything extraordinary. They wouldn't catch the eye of someone passing by. But for the person lying in that bed whose world has narrowed to breath, sensation, memory, those gestures carry the weight of everything that matters. In those final hours, the body does most of the work. It shuts down naturally in its own time. But the spirit is watching, listening, and often waiting, not out of fear or uncertainty, but out of love. And when the people they care for are near, when voices sound familiar and hands are warm and gentle, something inside them releases more easily. There's no need for a grand goodbye. Sometimes just knowing that their presence is woven into that last day, that last hour, is enough. And so I tell families, don't worry about what to say. Don't worry if your loved one hasn't spoken in days or if they no longer respond. Sit close, breathe with them, hold their hand. You are not just witnessing their passing, you are shaping the way they leave. You are helping them know without a doubt that they are not alone, and that knowing more than any medicine I can offer is what makes their death a peaceful one. And when it is finally over, when the last breath has left the body, when the quiet settles into every corner of the room, when the hands you've held for days grow still, you may find yourself suspended in a silence unlike anything you've ever known. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is not the absence of life, but the echo of it. A space so full of meaning, so dense with memory that even the air feels sacred. You may not know what to do next. You may find yourself frozen in the stillness, unsure whether to cry or pray or simply breathe. And that's all right. There is no right way to stand in the aftermath of a life that has gently completed its course. What I want you to know above all else is this: something beautiful has just happened. You may not be able to see it through the veil of grief, but in time you will. A person you loved has returned to the rhythm from which all life comes, not with fear, not with agony, but with grace. Their final hours were not a descent into darkness. They were a soft unraveling, a returning home. And you were there. You showed up. You stayed close. That simple, quiet act, your presence, became their safety. It became the final note in the melody of their life. You gave them what so many long for and too few receive. A peaceful passage, witnessed in love, surrounded by dignity, without fear. In the days to come, grief will move through you in unexpected ways. Sometimes it will be loud and overwhelming. Other times it will come like a whisper, brushing against your shoulder when you walk past their favorite chair, or hear a song they used to hum under their breath. It may take months, even years, to make peace with all that you've lost, but try to remember that grief is not a problem to solve or a wound to rush into healing. It is love, transformed. Love with nowhere to go but inward, searching for new ways to express itself in a world that feels different now. Do not rush to move on. Instead, move with it. With the ache, with the gratitude, with the stillness, and eventually with the memory that will soften and become a part of you. You may wonder if you did enough, if you said the right things, if you could have done more to make their final days lighter. I want to tell you, as someone who has walked this road with thousands of families, the fact that you were there, truly there, matters more than any perfect words. The hand you held, the silence you shared, the tears you tried to hide but didn't, all of it spoke what the heart could not. You were a witness, and that is holy. And now, as you return to the world outside, to errands and emails and days that feel far too ordinary, carry this truth with you. You have been transformed, not broken, not ruined, transformed. You have touched the edge of something eternal, and though it may feel like loss, it is also a profound initiation into love's deeper form. Let that shape you. Let it make you kinder, slower to anger, more generous with your time. Let it remind you on the hardest days that you have already stood at the doorway of goodbye and remained steady. There is strength in that. There is grace. And one day, many years from now perhaps, when your own time comes, when the room grows quiet and your breath begins to slow, may someone sit beside you with the same courage, the same tenderness, and the same fierce, silent love that you once gave. Because in the end, we all become the legacy of those who loved us well.